Okay, 6:31. I'd like to call this meeting to order. First order of business for the Budget Committee tonight is approval of the minutes from December 13th, 2018. Could I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. And discussion on the minutes? Any corrections, additions, omissions? So no changes? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes, December 13th, 2018, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? And abstentions are Mike and Connie. All right. Next order of business, presentation of the 2019, I just want to add one point of order for tonight. We're talking with facilities, and it's really important here, because of the acoustic, that we speak loudly and clearly, so that we, especially for our minute taker, to make sure that we can, the recordings are okay for her to be able to hear things. So please speak loudly and clearly. And again, just a reminder, one person talking at a time is going to help with that clarity as well. And moving on to the next order, presentation of the 2019-2020 school budget. We have Patty Sherman and Amber Wheeler and Tom Serafin.
So, for the record, I was here a few minutes ago, and I didn't have the heart to race ahead of Mr. Crean. Company down the hall. The poor man is dealing with some leg issues, and we need to be understanding of that.
You're right on time, Tom. Don't worry.
So, we certainly appreciate the opportunity. We do have a slightly unique presentation than what we've had in years past. Maybe not our first PowerPoint, but maybe more of the presentation on a PowerPoint than what we've done in the past. My intention is to review the agenda and the overview, which are our first couple of slides, and then turn it over to the subject matter experts. What we attempted to do with this presentation is to address questions that have already been asked by the Budget Committee in meetings up to this point, as well as highlight certain pieces of information that we thought it would be important for everyone to understand. So, with that overview being said, the agenda.
Excuse me, hold on just a moment. Do you have hard copies to take notes? Oh, we did not make copies of the presentation.
That would have been a good idea.
Yeah, sorry.
So.
Oh, okay. When can we get copies of the presentation?
We can email it out, probably? Yeah, right away.
Okay.
Yeah. We do this again, lesson learned.
If we just, I just want to make sure that it's clear that was a specific request for this meeting. We had talked about that at the Budget Committee meeting, that handouts would be available at this meeting.
Oh, we have handouts.
Yeah, we have all the materials.
We have handouts. We just don't have handouts at the specific presentation.
Paul's going to go make copies.
Okay.
Okay.
And you will have handouts. So there's plenty of handouts. At our whole budget packet, there's a handout for everyone. Frankly, we were hoping to go through the presentation and then pass out the handouts. You know, honestly, hoping to keep people focused on the presentation. But if the Budget Committee would prefer the handouts now, we can pass them over.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, that would be great. I think that handouts when we're going through. I think it's helpful just to take notes for the various topic points.
He should be right back.
Okay,
Sorry, I apologize. We
that's okay.
had all the binders ready and didn't even think about making copies of the slides.
We had some copier issues today too.
So do you want me to just wait a couple minutes?
What's the pleasure of the board?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, move on.
Okay, so, agenda, again, I gave a brief overview. Do you want to, spend a little bit of time this evening, talking about the FY 18 surplus? Jerry brought it up, at one point in terms of, some concern, and I believe the sentiment really was, if you're able to save that much money, did you really need it to begin with? So we would like to speak to that in some level of detail. And I'll kick that off personally when we get there. Do you want to show the tax rate history? I mentioned, that it's a little all over the board because of the significant surplus we returned. And it does look like there's a significant increase this year, but when you relate it to previous years, I think they'll make a lot more sense. You're either Fund 1 bottom line. We also broke out discretionary versus non-discretionary, just to get a sense for, out of the $25 million or so budget, where do we really feel that we have discretion to impact budget. I want to focus on the impact of the teacher contract for a little bit. 3-year contract. This is our last year of the contract, and just understanding the impact of the last year of that contract. Frankly, the impact the last 3 years of that contract had on the budget the last 3 years as well as this year. Show Fund 1 and how that's changed the last 10 years. I believe there were some questions relative to student enrollment. So I do want to show you where we are with that, review some costs per student numbers. There's definitely some concern over revenue. So we have a fairly detailed slide showing our approach to projecting revenue and some safeguards we believe have been built in to ensure what happened does not happen again. Grant funded positions, have an update on that. Also have some fairly specific information relative to health insurance. Our insurance is going down, but what I heard asked at budget committee was, what was the plan being offered? The town talked a lot about their particular plan and going to a different version of their plan in order to save some money. And then we heard that water has a different plan, sewer has a different plan. I thought it'd be helpful for everyone to understand what our plans are that we offer, what's happening in those plans, and sort of how they compare. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about village, the cost impact of closing the village and setting up a couple of modulars, the savings, and then the net impact, and then summarize the presentation. So moving on, overview. I thought it important to discuss what was the administration's and the board's approach to putting this budget together. I personally hate it when people read me PowerPoints, and sometimes it's hard not to. So putting the budget together, certainly strong focus on our mission. We need to deliver a certain mission, a certain level of education for the students at Pembroke as well as FPA students at Chichester and our sending students. Clearly sensitive to the bottom line. Want to make sure that we're being as responsible with our funds as possibly can be, and making sure that the dollars we're requesting really do relate specifically to that mission and are delivering our best bang for the buck. It's important, and we've been doing this for a while, and we can talk about this in a little more detail, that we continue to adjust to a changing enrollment. Especially at Pembroke Academy, you'll see when we get to that part of the presentation, enrollment is a lot less. What you'll also see is we've clearly made significant adjustments to adjust to that enrollment. Part of putting this budget together was the closing of village and prepare a meal. There's certainly some substantial impacts in there. And we also finally want to ensure that Pembroke Academy remains a school of choice. We have an AREA agreement with Allenstown, Epsom, and Chichester, which, you know, to a degree locks them in, but that doesn't mean that those folks can't request to other places if they feel another school meets their needs more. We also have a number of students and our administrators or principals can speak to from other area schools, including Hoosick, which is probably our biggest non-area spending town. That has significant impact financially on the district, and remaining a school of choice is, I think, you know, vitally important to maintaining everything that we do here. So that is really sort of our focus in putting together a budget. What was important to us, what we wanted to make sure we can ensure. Any questions about that? When we're talking about making this presentation tonight, last thing I want us to do is to just sort of whip through this. Really want to take time, pause, ask if there are any questions, encourage questions. We have a number of folks here this evening that are able to answer hopefully most, if not all, of your questions. So please, as they come to you, just stop us. We'll stop at any given point in time and do our best to address whatever question the budget committee may have. So, starting out with FY18 surplus review, I do want to turn that over to Amber, and I believe we have at least one principal. We have Paul and John who are here. Amber's going to go over the numbers, and Paul and John have been asked to speak to the specific impact of the numbers.
I have a question.
One of the things that just jumped out at me looking at your expenditure areas is that fringes of $333,000 is about 84–85% of salaries. And traditionally we've seen numbers where fringe benefit costs were somewhere closer to 40%. If you could make sure that we get an explanation of why that, what constitutes that fringe number and how it's got to be as high as it is. Because usually you pay $1 in salaries and you pay 40 cents in Social Security, retirement, insurance, by paying 84 or 85 cents for every $1 in salaries. It's been alarming. Thank you.
Okay. So I first wanted to just start off with, as you know, last year, through multiple discussions starting back in October, in light of the tax rate hike, the school district and school board really took a look at their budget and said, you know what, at this point in time, we need to do a freeze. And we've been talking about, we talked about that freeze the entire budget session. And due to that freeze, it caused some surplus expenditures or appropriation in a good portion of the Pembroke budget. So I just kind of highlighted the areas that had the largest surpluses in those lines. Salaries was one of them, and one of the salary and fringes, they pretty much go hand in hand. And a lot of that is that with some open positions that we had that we were originally going to fill, we didn't fill, so we kept them vacant throughout the year instead of filling them. So that created a surplus in those lines. One of the other pieces is supplies, tuition, staff development, those type of areas. Because we froze the budget, we weren't buying anything unless it was an emergency. And we discussed those items, I would say almost on a daily basis as things would come up. The principals and the administration would contact Patty and I and discuss whether we believe that was a need at that point in time or whether it could wait till later on in the year or whatever it may be. So it's a pretty active discussion all year long. So those are the areas that we had some surplus of appropriation. The revenue side, tuition was, we had a decent amount of tuition, and a lot of that has to do with, the new approach, or, the change in approach that we took last year in regards to taking a look at enrollment, utilizing some data that I had pulled together from the previous years, and utilizing that 90% estimated. We continue to look at enrollment on a monthly basis. I update the boards on a monthly basis, not just Pembroke, but also the area boards as well, so that they can see where their enrollment is for their district, and to help us be able to create further down the line some data that we can continue to use to provide us with some analytical data moving forward, so that we can make sure that we're accurately projecting out what the potential enrollment would be for the year to come. State aid is one of the ones, the reason why I put this in there is because I thought it was good to note that there was a reallocation of adequacy aid later in the year, where they took a look at the numbers and allocated out additional funds to districts, and they wanted us to segregate that amount of money out into other state aid rather than lumping it in with the adequacy aid. So that's how it ended up on the MS 25. Medicaid, the reason why I put Medicaid on here is I put that on here because that number fluctuates, I would feel like, almost the most out of the revenue, and that's because it's based on student needs at the current time, the current roster of students that we have. So while we try to estimate as much as we can at that point in time, it does change, fluctuate throughout the year, because we are obviously budgeting 14, 15 months in advance. That student body can change, and not just the student body, but also the services that those individual students that are in at that time could also change in that period of time. So I wanted to note that. The miscellaneous income does, a lot of that, it has happened to be, we had some insurance claims that came through, we had some refunds from some materials that we had purchased that sent back, and so we are refunded for those. We had some write-offs, those types of typical things that came through that line. Putting together the budget appropriation and the surplus from the revenue is how we came up with that $1.3 million that we then turned around and turned back to offset the taxes for 2018.
Amber, on your revenue side of things, it's my understanding that certain components of state aid come in the period following when they're incurred. I was wondering to what extent we have a situation like that, and more important than whether it happens is whether it's a material amount. Because you can either have you incurred horrific costs and the state's going to give you some money back, and it may only be so many cents on the dollar, but you don't get it until the next period. So to the extent that any of that exists, I think it would help the budget committee to understand what we might be seeing in revenue that was related to past costs, and what kind of costs are we incurring this year that we would hope to expect the revenue in the following season.
I mean,
So can you reference specifically catastrophic aid? I know, but
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, catastrophic aid works.
Tell people what it is, what catastrophic aid is, how it works, and how it passes.
Explain that to Mike.
So it used to be called catastrophic aid, it's just straight special education aid now. So the government, sets a rate that they would consider if we incur costs for special education students beyond that rate, it was catastrophic. So they set that rate at 3.5 times the average state salary. So if the state salary were $15,000, 3.5 times that, they would consider, okay, if you go beyond that, that's a lot of money, we're gonna have to give you some supplemental funding for that. The formula was supposed to be, which is what Jerry was alluding to, we would get 80% back beyond that 3.5 times. So we got to the 3.5 times, and they said, okay, anything over that, we'll give you 80% of that back. The trouble is, you incur the cost, you have these students, they can move in on a, any given day, and you don't get the money until the following year. Now, their promise to fund that at 80% has not been fulfilled, and I think this year was 70.
Yeah, ended up with 70, and originally I wanted to say
Not
it
bad.
was 60, we budgeted at the 67 range, because that's originally what it had been coming in at. But we did, I wanna say a week or two ago, received updated figures, and it was 70%.
So not only is that number hard to predict, it's based on the students in your district. So if we said, okay, we have the student that the total cost is $100,000, so let's project our CAD aid to get reimbursed yearly and to get revenue the following year, we're projecting really far ahead, and if we project that line, we can come up short in our revenue. So it's one of those costs that fluctuates.
And it trails by
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
And I think I prefaced my comment by saying if it's material. So I understand it's a complex situation, it's not an easy answer. So if your professional opinion is it's not gonna be material to your expenditure level or the impact on the budget, then simply saying we don't think it's material this year would satisfy me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, looking at when the revenues come in throughout the year, I would say that anything that were to fall in the following year is not material. Really, the one thing that tends to lag is Medicaid. Sometimes we'll get that in the beginning of July, and even those are very small amounts at that point in time. So everything else pretty much comes throughout the year. CAD aid comes in December, so that's over and done with at that point in time. And really, it's just the town appropriation and the revenue that we get in from the tuition each quarter, or actually do it in thirds. So we can pretty much project that out as we're going along. So at this point in time, I do not see anything as being material.
Thank you.
With your supplies and equipment, at any point, are we going to have a breakdown of what it is that includes? Or being new to the school year?
So, I've also asked the principals to speak to the operational impact of these numbers, and part of their presentation is gonna be specifically answering that question. What we did to get there.
Okay. So, and again,
So, yes.
I'm familiar with this. So each one of those topics, you're gonna be breaking down and making it very clear. I mean, I know what you're doing now, but supplies and equipment,
So,
what does that entail?
we don't, if we possibly pull together the details around that, the principals were gonna speak to it at a high level, and after they get done talking, you need more detail, then we can follow them in. So with that being said, any other questions about the numbers before they?
I have one question about this slide, I'm just looking for a little bit of clarity. So the numbers on the right, the revenue numbers, Amber?
Yes.
Are those revenues in addition to what we were anticipating getting?
No, that's like where we ended at the end of the year.
That's, so those are the totals where we ended?
Yes.
Okay, so those.
And that doesn't equate to obviously the full one, I just kind of picked out pieces that were larger.
So those were the areas, and I'm paraphrasing, so I'm looking for feedback, I'm paraphrasing. Those are the areas where we ended up with more revenue than we were anticipating,
That's correct.
and those are the total value revenues for those areas.
For those
But
areas.
the difference is not here.
No.
Okay.
But that is in your binder when you get your binder, that estimated revenue sheet that you've seen in the past.
Yeah,
That is in your binder.
okay, cool.
So, yes.
All right, so that brings me to the on the left side, we have tuition.
Yes.
And there is, I'm trying to understand is that additional tuition than what we were anticipating?
No,
That is
No,
not.
that is expended, what?
That's not our full tuition.
No, I know that, that's
But that's
different.
what we're asking.
No, let me, yeah.
Yeah.
So that tuition, those are expenditures, that has to do with our vocational program.
Oh, okay.
So completely different.
Tuition as an expenditure.
Correct,
Okay,
correct,
all
so
right,
it's very different.
okay.
So on the left side is budget appropriation, on the right side is revenue. So, completely different thing. Yeah, that's the difference between the two. So the budget appropriation for those that are new are those that are voted, it deals with the, budget that was voted in March. And revenue has to do with the money that we receive in we estimate what revenue would be, and then it's the actual money that we're receiving. So the overages, basically, so unanticipated.
And remember, this is a sort of a high-level overview introductory. We have the typical handouts with everything broken out into detail. And I think it might help you too, being new on the budget committee, when you see our budget, there's lots of notes in there. So it might help you understand what's in each of those lines, like the supplies and the equipment. Thank you.
So any other number questions? So,
I just want to ask the question again. As I understand the column on the left, these are areas where there was surplus because you didn't spend appropriated amounts. And if you didn't spend $395,000 in salaries, somehow you saved $333,000, almost $334,000 in fringe. I assume that's fringe benefits associated with salary.
Yes,
So
it's most of it, I mean, you gotta take into consideration plan changes and things like that as well.
So you saved a considerably larger percent on fringe benefit than would normally be expected. Do you know offhand, if you don't pay $1 in salaries, what is your savings in fringe? That would be your 7.065 FICA, whatever
Yeah,
it is, that
I think
state
it's like, I
retirement.
wanna say it's like 26, if when you add them all up, I think it's like 26% or something like
And
that.
I see where I'm coming from, that
Yep.
the fringe savings is a lot more than 26% of the salary.
And it isn't just salaries, a big portion that tends to happen, even though you don't freeze a budget, it tends to be plan changes that occur throughout the year.
Okay.
And that happens frequently.
The person in family that goes down to single person.
Correct, yep, or we may have hired somebody in new, and we had budgeted at one rate, and then we hired someone new, and they may have selected a different plan, so those fluctuations also occur, it's not strictly comparative to that particular salary budgeted at that year. They will fluctuate.
Thank you.
other number questions? So again, all these cuts certainly had a significant impact on the daily operation of the district, and I'll just start out with our headmaster at Pembroke Academy to speak to what it meant having to deliver this.
Generally speaking, we put a considerable amount of restrictions on all of our departments, starting with supplies, consumables, things that are day-to-day in nature that educators are becoming accustomed to using to supplement instruction. We put a freeze on any book requisitions for textbooks, keeping in mind that some of our courses, while they do run year-long, there are other courses that are semester-long in length. So at the mid-year point in the school year, we were telling departments and teachers that books that they had anticipated the prior spring coming through were not going to be coming in. In supply categories, things like the science department come to mind because they are frequently utilizing live specimens. They are utilizing chemicals, samples, things that are, they have a very limited shelf life, so things that may have been a carryover from the prior school year had expiration dates on them and were not utilized, and that put their instruction to a certain extent on a standstill. And a lot of teachers were voicing concern that they were augmenting their curriculum substantially to accommodate the budget freeze. And while it was a significant inconvenience building-wide, our teachers did what they had to do to keep the curriculum moving forward and to provide the very best level of education that they could. That's not to say that the teachers in this building were not significantly impacted by putting our budget on a whole freeze.
Do you want to speak, or can you go back? Do you want to speak to any of those other boards? Oh.
Sure. Here in the library and the media center, supporting text and audiovisual materials that our library and media specialists had anticipated utilizing to assist in classroom instruction with classes that were brought here were no longer in play. She had to kind of operate on the fly and utilize what resources she currently had at the time. But that did impact the level of assistance that she had anticipated providing classroom teachers bringing classrooms down here. In addition, we also, had some plans to refurbish or recondition some technology here in the media center that was also put on a standstill, and some of our devices that are down here in the media center are hand-me-downs, for lack of a better term, from other departments, and those too had, some of them were nearing end of life and were not able to be replenished. So the level of instruction that occurred here in the media center, which on a daily basis is relatively robust, came to a screeching halt as well.
If you would, I'm spacing it on exactly what the term is, but I know that periodically, the high school has to go through a process where there are representatives from peer schools come around, and it's a recertification process to make sure that, accreditation, thank you, Dave. In what you had to do in operating without all the supplies you needed and whatnot, had this been an accreditation year, would you have had difficulty meeting the accreditation requirements in your estimation?
I don't think it would have impacted our ability to attain reaccreditation. However, in the report, you would have likely found numerous references to the budget freeze, both from the committee, who would have been external presences in the building, as well as faculty, staff, and students who tend to get interviewed for those reports, would have likely referenced the freeze as well, having an impact on the education here.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just had a follow-up question to that. I certainly appreciate, Master, the professional manner that you were able to conduct a lot of that chaos, I guess, last year, for lack of a better word right now. I really appreciate that and what the teachers did to manage that as well. I was wondering if you could give some insight on, and you mentioned the impact to teachers and how they were having to manage that. Can you give some insight into the impact on the quality of education itself on these?
Certainly. So administration made it a point to be visible and present in the classroom so that we could attest to what kind of impact it was having in the classroom in real time. I would say that the level of professionalism that our staff showed throughout the process was commendable, and they really did not bring that baggage, so to speak, into their classrooms to share with students. They operated as if it was all systems go, status quo, and you would not have let on that something was different. However, that being said, they did make substantial changes to their curriculum, varying across the departments, to how they deliver their instruction, and again, the sciences come to mind specifically. When you're operating with a limited shelf life on samples or chemicals or specimens, sometimes labs are changed, and what a student may have seen in the prospectus at the beginning of the course may not have been in actuality what they experienced later on in the semester. But knowing the science department as I do, and many of them are seasoned educators, they simply called an audible at the line of scrimmage and figured out a way to make it work. But it did have an impact on the delivery of what they anticipated to be the expected curriculum last year, and did articulate that to the administration.
Other questions for Paul? John Marston, Principal Brewers.
I can echo, almost, I won't repeat everything Paul said, but the same exact thing happened with Three Rivers. One of the bigger blows to us was, if somebody left the building for whatever reason, we did not fill those positions. We were building great. We're not as big as PA, but, an impact like that it's difficult. That means, some people are, doing more than they need, and should, for student support. We did everything we could to make sure the students had paper. If, to get to the first person who asked about what supplies were, paper, pencils, some basic things, we made sure students had that. But if a printer lost its ink, don't worry, we have to find another way to do it. You know, those type of things, along with what Paul had said, has quite an impact on the building. And to get to your point about, you know, teacher impact, I had more than one teacher ask me, is this time for me to leave Pembroke? And that really bothered me. That hit me right between the eyes. Because these are people that I, think very highly of and have spent a lot of time in this district, and given their career in this town. And when they asked me that, is it time for me to leave? That was a very difficult thing for me to ask.
Questions for John? So just, I guess a couple of closing thoughts. You don't see a slide for impact to, Hill Village for a couple of reasons. One was, apparently our principal at Hill Village, is extremely proactive and made a lot of purchases before the budget freeze. So was probably least impacted. Thank God that wasn't done at all levels, or else we wouldn't have certainly been able to do what we were able to do. The other reason she's not here today is she is dealing with, we don't want her here, she's dealing with an illness that we just assumed she'd keep to herself. So not that they weren't impacted. Similarly, the whole district was impacted, but I think looking to our superintendent, from a supply standpoint, yeah, she won on that one. And then I went back and forth on whether to make this point, and I think I will, especially in light of Mr. Marston's comments. It was clearly evident and obvious to the board the impact of what we were doing. It was perhaps one of the most draconian things I've seen done at the board level, going back to, I don't know, over 20 years ago, when there was a significant cut on the floor of the school district meeting, and we lost art and music and libraries, etc. It was that impactful. That being said, it was an extremely difficult time for the board, for the district, for all our educators. We went into this, quite honestly, believing that we were solely responsible for what happened to the tax rate. We knew how hard that was for the citizens of Pembroke to deal with that, because frankly, we're citizens of Pembroke. We had to deal with that same impact. And if it was our responsibility that happened, it was our responsibility to do whatever we had to do to mitigate as much of that as possible. It wasn't an easy decision. It certainly wasn't made lightly. It took a tremendous amount of effort from everyone in the entire district. You'll see in some of those slides, people, reached into their own pockets and to make some stuff happen, which is certainly not unusual for teachers. They did all sorts of amazing things, but I can't overstate enough how difficult it was, how much it impacted. Not that they didn't do yeoman's work and deliver a quality year for our students, but it certainly wasn't the type of year we wanted to deliver. And it really was, the board feeling like, we did something that frankly never should have happened, and we need to do everything in our power to mitigate that. So that's that.
I have a question really more of a concern. You mentioned that at the Hill Village level, that operating supplies and the like were stocked up ahead of the freeze. So I guess my question is, today, if you had a school principal with a crystal ball and they thought that there was gonna be another freeze, do they have the authority to go in and order advanced supplies, more than what they would need to operate on a day-to-day basis in order to, duck the implications of a freeze? Or is there oversight that would prevent that from happening?
There is certainly oversight by administration. I think at the elementary school, it's easier to predict what you need from a year. So, you know, you just know how much construction paper you're gonna use. If you're experienced and you've been there forever, they're more traditional supplies at that level, and it's common for that to get done over the summer when we have staff and school's not in session, and they can get everything the teachers need and have the rooms ready and have the supplies ready. I think, like, to Paul's point, things like science labs and such, you can't order that stuff ahead. Same as some of the materials at Three Rivers School. So I think it depends on the school and what they're using supplies for, but there's certainly oversight and no frivolous, stockpiling of materials.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one question, it's kind of philosophical. It's not unusual when organizations are forced into cost-cutting measures for those who are left to have to deal with that, to come up with creative ways of doing more, better for less. They find efficiencies in their processes, whereas not being pushed into those situations, oftentimes you just kind of keep doing what you're doing. But oftentimes there's an opportunity, right, to, like I say, figure out ways of doing more in a better way for less resources. I was wondering if you had any opportunities or examples where maybe that came out of this experience, which could be something very positive, right? Say, yeah, we figured out how to do this a little bit better than what we were doing before. Do you have any stories of that type to share?
Ask our principals who are here if they have any.
None come to mind. I certainly think there was a mindfulness, after last year, going into this year's budget process, where going to departments and asking, sort of what Mr. Fleury just said, looking into that crystal ball, and should this happen again, what kind of measures can we put in place to, request what is appropriate and what is fiscally responsible, but also allows you to deliver the most effective instruction possible. With that being said, I think about our art department, who typically in the pottery classes uses glazes and things of that nature, sort of segmenting some of those supplies so that they do have a longer shelf life, and maybe pairing students up to work on a pottery piece rather than having students do their own individual piece like in years past. Things like science, where robotics is also a co-curricular and now a curricular realm in the science department, finding ways that we can, it's the same staff member who does both the curricular and co-curricular piece, finding ways to tap into those resources that aren't necessarily consumable or expendable, but reusable, so that they can be used in the classroom and then once again used with the co-curricular group to supplement their piece as well. But short of those two that come to mind off the top, nothing else that we really did outside of the norm, except for more mindful requisitions when it came to budget time.
I think it's important too, because I completely agree with you. I want to remind you that we're not flush with supplies anyway. So, I mean, my school has about $10,000 for supplies for 350 kids. Do the math. About $20, $30 a kid for a whole year. That's on a good year. So when you freeze that, you have to get creative. One of the things that we did was send out an email to parents. We need cardboard for a project. People started bringing in cardboard. We've always done that, but we did more of that. We relied on parents to help with those type of supplies. So while I understand the supply thing is, that seems to be the topic, there's some other things like staff that we didn't hire. Those are the bigger impacts, and that's going to get you the bigger buck, right? But staff are pretty creative and always have been with general supplies. Teachers bring their own stuff all the time. This is nothing new there, but so yeah, we get creative. We try different things like Paul did. You sometimes team kids up from fours instead of twos, so they can use supplies differently that way. The experience is not the same, but it stimulates it. So I just want to remind people that we're not, talking $1 million in supplies. That's part of the school's problem when we have to cut. You know, you can cut all that stuff and not make a dent in $1 million issue. You have to get to the core of what we're trying to, deliver to students, which is from athletics to, teachers to the program. That's where this begins to really hit hard. When I couldn't replace 3 staff members, that we're counting on to deliver services, that is where the struggle becomes.
Yeah, you know, and if I can just sort of summarize that, because I completely agree. Reality is, and you'll see in just next couple of slides, sort of what we've been doing relative to managing expenses for a while. And I can tell you something, we talk about my day job is, you know, the whole expression, you know, we need to figure out a way to do more with less. At a certain point in time, you have to do less with less. You just cannot continue to do more with less. And this year was a year where we had to do less with less. Any questions about the freeze or the impact or the dollars or anything relative to that?
Again, I'm with my wife being new here. You had mentioned robotics and things like that, and it was my understanding that there was quite a bit of fundraising done by the parents and the students themselves. And I've also seen cheerleaders here raising funds for this, but cooperative students are utilizing these fundraising funds to kind of supplement their these things like robotics.
So those fundraising efforts were done purely for the co-curricular round, so for the robotics after-hours program, and those funds, 100% accessed by those clubs and available. We were not freezing any of those funds. And same with the cheerleaders, the fall and winter skier groups, both of their fundraising for their own purposes, for uniforms and for choreographing and things of that nature. But none of that was frozen during the effort. It was purely theirs to access.
The Three Rivers, we do 2 major trips. We take 6th graders to environmental camp, and 8th graders go to DC, and that's 100% fundraising. We don't freeze that, so it's not a budget impact at all.
I can tell you along those lines though, we've had spirited conversation at the board level over the years relative to fundraising, because the fact of the matter, Pembroke's not a very big town. Ann and I live across the street from each other, and any given fall, we could be visited by countless different groups, all selling the same discount cards, to support countless different activities. And it really is a burden on, frankly, parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents. God forbid you have 3 or 4 grandkids in the district, and they all want you to buy Yankee candles, and they all want you to buy chocolate bars, and they all want you, and frankly, they do. Grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles step up, and neighbors step up to a degree possible. But we just really feel like we go to the well way too many times. So what we looked at the board level is, to what degree can we take some of that burden off these groups to allow them to continue to operate and not require them to do as much fundraising? And the reality is, it never makes the budget. Often it's put in the budget early on just to see what it would be. This year we put in an early draft of the budget, what it would cost, because the board wanted to see if we sent all of our 6th graders to environmental camp and the operational budget and all of our 8th graders to DC. Those are amazing educational opportunities that are getting more and more difficult for people to afford. We just wanted to see. That would be an amazing thing to be able to offer. You see the number, and guess what comes up? Those. So it is something that we struggle with at the board level. And really where we've come down to is, frankly, like safety issues. We have a Pembroke Friends of Football, that without Pembroke Friends of Football, we wouldn't have a football program. They do a tremendous amount of fundraising to support the program above and beyond uniforms. They were, for a period of time, all football helmets need to be reconditioned and recertified every year. Someone needs, a professional, business needs to say these are good and safe to use for this next year. Pembroke Friends of Football was funding that. That is something at the board level that we weren't comfortable putting that safety issue in the hands of fundraising. And we said, if this is a varsity sport that we're gonna support, that is something we need to ensure is happening adequately. So we have stepped up relative to that, but, you know, we have a cooperative hockey program with Campbell High School. So students from both Pembroke Academy and Campbell High School can play on the same varsity team. It's really hard to compete with low practice time. The district pays for the ice time for the games. The Friends of Hockey pay for the practice. And these guys will all kick me up on saying something wrong, but I think I am right. We'll pay for the practice ice time, which is substantial. Again, from a board level, that's not a safety issue. You know, it's ice time. They've been funding it. It's an expensive sport, and without it, we're not sure we can continue to operate. So we've come down on the side of it. If it's a safety issue, we probably shouldn't be relying on fundraising. But outside of the safety issue, we're really, you know, we need all these groups to be doing what we're doing to continue to operate what we're offering. Can I just speak at all?
Not at all.
Sure?
Positive.
All right, thank you. So, you know, I know more people are like me than not. When you get a budget, you really go to the back page, want to see what the impact is. So getting through that, I sort of wanted to bring everyone to the back page and show folks what the impact is. So the next couple of slides are our tax rate history, fund one last 10 years, etc. I mentioned this at a budget committee meeting a couple of meetings ago, because it is rather dramatic. Right now, the budget we're putting in front of you, the increase from last year's tax rate. So I want to make sure everyone understands that. So we'd be going from $14.46 to $17.35. That is a huge increase. Probably, quite possibly, one of the biggest increases we've had in the history of the district. For to understand why that happened, that 1.3 million we returned resulted in a one-year temporary depression in the tax rate, bringing it all the way down to $14.46. Or quite frankly, that brought our tax rate down to pre-2008 levels. If you look at the 1735, it is still less than for 2019, it is still less than the 2017 tax rate. So it is certainly significant compared to last year. It is a reduction compared to 2 years ago, and it is, you know, a modest increase from 16. So I did want to sort of put that out there early in the presentation to just make sure folks were aware of what happened, and certainly open up the floor to any questions folks have relative to what our proposed budget would do to the tax rate, why, and also show the history.
question. How successful do you think you're gonna be selling an increase in that level to the voters?
With your support, I think we'll be successful.
You overestimate my ability to sway people.
It really is, and that's why we need to look at 10 years. It is less than 2017's budget.
I appreciate the logic of the numbers, but in absolute terms, you're telling people that, when they put the pen to the checkbook, it's gonna be a bigger number.
Than it was this past year.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, hopefully people understand. What I don't think you'd want a district doing, and I can't certainly speak to future boards, is there's nothing statutorily obligated, there's no statutorial obligations on the board to do anything about the increase. We could have not done a freeze, we had the appropriations. And that's why I wanted to talk about that. We took draconian measures to mitigate what we believed at the time was an issue that was 100% our fault. Quite frankly, it was nowhere near 100% our fault, but we didn't even understand that. We had people come to board meetings suggesting, don't do it. Don't do it because that's gonna happen. So our choice was to either do what we did, attempt to mitigate what we believed was 100% our issue, or quite frankly, say it is what it is, spent that $1.3 million, it wasn't all appropriation, it was some revenue. So spend that, not return anything for property tax relief, and then guess what you'd be seeing this year? You'd be seeing a tax decrease from $19 and some odd cents down to $17, and I think people would be thrilled. So I understand, Jerry. It causes me sleepless nights. But we did return that money. We did create a 1-year debt.
As a member of the budget committee, I see my obligation as twofold. To ensure that the recommendation of the committee is a number that you can run your programs with, because there's some social impact to what you do. On the other hand, part of my obligation is the affordability of whatever that tax rate is. And we don't have a whole lot of leeway. I have joked before, no, that's not a problem. Let's just vote up the state revenues side of the equation, and we'll be fine. The state will have to fund it, reverse mandate. But that doesn't work. The danger, as I see it, is that if this is not brought forward to the larger voting population, so that they agree that a higher number in the coming spring is a justified number, nothing prevents them from standing up at the floor of the meeting and cutting $5 million out of your budget. And if they've got the votes, they can do it. And that's not a position that I want to see you in. I'm sure it's not a position you want to be in, but that's the danger.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
I totally agree. My preference would be for both of these committees to come to the number that we could make school district meeting, that we could vote for boards and not have the situation that we had last year. There was all day divisive, debating, if there's any way that we could avoid that, I'd like to do that. I don't think this number is going to do that, but I hope that we can work together in the coming weeks to try and figure out what that number would be. And we can help you, I mean, we still need to look at the budget, right? We haven't seen anything. So we need to get in there and look at those numbers like the board always does and have those discussions. But ultimately, Jerry, I'm with you. I'd like to.
And I think, Karen, if we move on to the section on discretionary versus non-discretionary, might give us an opportunity to hear what the school board views as costs that are beyond control.
All right, moving on then, well, the next slide is just that. So that is our current bottom line, and I guess I'll ask Amber to speak to, there are some bullets there, sort of defining, but speak to, some specific examples of what those numbers.
Sure. As Tom just stated, so our current proposed budget is $24,688,967. So what we've kind of done is gone through the budget and said, okay, what would be looked at as discretionary, what would be non-discretionary, to see, what the impact was of those two different categories. So while doing that, some of the examples, as I mentioned, for discretionary are, personnel, and if there's personnel, then fringe potentially could fall under this as well, if they are attached together. Supplies, equipment, those are the main pieces of discretionary. The non-discretionary we have is $12,969,4. It's special education costs. Those, those they're mandated. We have to uphold that. Contractual items that we've already entered into contracts that we need to continue to pay forward, as well as our lease and bond payments. Those are the biggest topics as I was kind of going through to say, okay, what were the key items that fell into this? Non-discretionary, the reason why I mentioned fringe in the first one is fringe can also be non-discretionary, because if it's not attached to personnel, we do have an obligation to pay health benefits and so forth. So the only way it would be discretionary is if it was attached to personnel, which we can rehire or changed or modified a position or vacated a position.
A question on explaining the benefits. If you cut a position, do you have an ongoing obligation for a period of time with things like health insurance?
If we were to do a layoff, is that what you mean?
Right.
It's typically just that, by the end of that month.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I know you do this probably every year for us, but could you again define the term Fund 1 so we understand?
Sure. So Fund 1 is your operating budget. So those are items that, in your main budget that you see before you. And then you have a Fund 4 budget, which is your food service budget. And then the other funds are your grants. So Fund 1 is your operating budget. So what comes before the town, we have on the last page of the budget, we typically have a total Fund 1, and then we have a total appropriation. The total Fund 1 is your total operating budget. The Fund 4 and the grants are offset by revenue.
Okay.
Directly offset by revenue.
Other questions? So again, we looked at the impact of the tax rate and comparing it to last year, it is what it is. Comparing it to previous years. Also thought it was important for the committee to understand what the Fund 1 budget, again, essentially our budget, looked like for the past 10 years. So as you can see, our 1920 budget proposed is just slightly over, I understand my perspective may not be everyone's, over 1819. And I will speak to that briefly. But what I thought was interesting is, less than 1718, less than 1617, pretty much in line by just not that many dollars from 1516. So we've gone years with essentially a relatively flat budget. We can come back to this, but Josh, can you go to the next slide, please?
Question about that, well, it's not a question, it's more of a comment or affirmation, which the thing that's important, I think, to keep in mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, on these numbers and comparing them year over year, one piece that's missing here is the revenue amount,
Right.
which influences ultimately that number, which ultimately is what influences the tax rate, right? And we know for a fact that the revenue value year over year has been going down. So that's creating that larger gap, which is, they're really not apples to apples here, right?
Well, no, we're apples to apples just on the fund line. And what I wanted to highlight was from an appropriation standpoint, where we've kept that. And again, I think I'll make more of a point when I go to the next slide.
Okay.
We have a whole section on revenue.
Okay.
So, when you look at Fund 1 this year, 24,688,957, again, when you look at last year's 24,402,410, the impact of this year's teacher's contract alone on the Fund 1 budget, and this was a contract that was supported by the Budget Committee 3 years ago, was $393,694. So, we kept our Fund 1 budget. We are coming in $100,000 less in just the increase of the teacher contract for this year. The cost of that contract over 3 years is closer to $2 million. Because again, it's about that much money year one. Then in year two, it is year one's increase plus year two's increase. Then in year three, it's year one plus year two plus year three. That equates to about $1.7 million. So had we level funded everything else in the budget and everything else stayed flat, we would have expected to see almost a $2 million increase in the budget. We didn't do that. We made substantial cuts in order to offset contractual and other increases that were outside of our control, and we'll certainly see those cuts. So, questions about that before we move on? So one of the ways we've done that is staff reductions, and I'm gonna let our superintendent speak to that for this year's budget.
So some of these staff reductions we had already told you about last year, that we anticipated when the schools merged, we would be able to cut some personnel. So we, unfortunately had to cut some of those staff members last year. So some of those cuts have already been realized, but in addition to those, we are cutting one guidance counselor, as a result of merging the two schools. We'll have one school nurse because of the merge. Josh is going to shuffle some of his custodial staff, so that merging the schools will be cutting 1.5. I think you heard some of us talk last year about the secretarial staff, so we have our front offices both staffed in the two schools, so we'll be cutting 1.5 positions when the two schools merge. And then the two teachers that we're cutting are not a result of the merge, they are our response to some declining enrollment.
So if I could look back at the last couple pages of presentations and maybe phrase this a different way. You've got a guidance counselor, a nurse, custodial, secretarial, and teaching staff. And the net increase to the CBA for the remaining staff was $393,694. And because you cut another $107,147, your overall proposed budget increase is reduced to $286,547, is that correct?
I think so.
Thank you.
I have great trust in your math abilities. Years.
I only paid $1.97 for my calculator, so.
But I'm not gonna attest to that in front of an auditor.
I just had a question about, the two schools. I know that there was, at one time, one principal for both, and then there was a principal at each. What is it now?
This year, we have asked the principal to cover both buildings, knowing that we were gonna merge. So there's a principal and an assistant principal right now, and we will maintain that model for next year as well, when they merge. So one principal, one assistant.
And it used to be just two principals with
Yes.
no assistant?
Correct.
So is that a reduction in the salary?
Yes.
For the assistant principal?
Yes. Yeah.
That is something, a decision, we supported at the board level, in anticipation of this happening. And frankly, also timed it with the retirement of a long tenured, principal, who honestly was an assistant principal by title, for a while, and sort of ended her career for several years being recognized as a building principal. It was a good argument that was brought to the board, why we needed a level of leadership in each building, and the value that would bring, but it was a short term, and then we're going back to the model that we have now. So we're on the same page. Our administrative staffing model at every school in the district is a principal and assistant principal. We have a little more support at Pembroke Academy, and we can speak to the specifics that people want to know, just because it's a much bigger school. But, Three Rivers, principal assistant, and, Hill Village, principal assistant. And especially for newer members or others, that, I've heard forever, at school district meetings and throughout the year, oh, no, they never cut administrators. Why don't they ever cut administrators? This, that, and next thing. If y'all would like to see job descriptions and understand what they do, we'd be certainly happy to provide that information to you. I can say, I'm not sure how well we can run our individual schools with a principal and assistant principal ratio.
That was actually my question. What do you need the assistant principal for?
So, Mr. Marston, why don't you, can you speak to the general job responsibilities of you as principal, and then let me depend on your assistant for it?
Yeah, I think it really needs, whatever the superintendent tells me to do. It doesn't happen. At Three Rivers, we kind of break it down into another categories. One is I have about 65 adult staff members that, I manage, I get staff development for, I evaluate, and manage a lot of the staff. All the curriculum in the building I typically manage, and I do all the budget, and any of those type of things, legal things that come up, which is very regularly. My assistant, she helps me with some of that stuff, but most of her job, frankly, is student management, and the athletics. And remember, today we have 358 students, and that is a very busy job. And we both support each other, we work very closely as a team, and it's not like I don't deal with students, because I do, and it's not like she doesn't deal with staff, but she does. What am I missing, Paul?
John, can you speak, when you say student management, can you give us some specifics of what that would entail and get to?
Discipline, generally discipline, but it may be more than that. It may be a student in crisis, that we as a team have to manage. That happens very regularly in a building. And it's anything from a kid, getting kicked out of class for, tipping over a chair, to a student that's in a fight, to a clogged bathroom, because the kid threw a tennis ball in and flushed it. You know, I've been known to, pull things out of toilets. That is not really an enjoyable experience. Kids write on walls, they get angry, they, break things, they get in fights, they swear, and it's, you know, I feel like I'm painting a really bad picture. There's also kids that go into crisis, and that we're seeing more and more and more. And when I say crisis, that can be, anything from, crying and not able to stop, to anger, where they're running around the building, where they're throwing things, tearing things off walls. I don't know how much, and also dealing, one of my jobs also is dealing with parents, and, there's kind of a client, and, you know, depending on what's going on, we have to manage, anything that's going on with their student and their parent, I'm typically, dealing with that daily. We also have to, operate our whole student information system, which is a computer system that houses all of our grading, and we're responsible to make sure all the report cards go out, that all the grading is done, communication from the school, foster children, homeless, mental health issues are really, really big. I hate to say it, but it's reality. It's a really, really big issue in schools right now. I don't know how to.
Paul, is there anything you'd like to add relative to?
Well, I don't know what's going on in Three Rivers, but here in the academy,
We send them to you.
we have 800 of those situations. I'm fortunate to have a very strong and fortified administrative team. I have two, we call them deans of students, but they are assistant principals, for lack of a better term. We split our alphabet in half, and each one of them has approximately 400 to 410 students on their caseload. They assist students with their 4-year graduation plans and see that seniors fulfill their graduation requirements, in addition to attendance and discipline issues. We have an athletic director who handles our 40-plus NHIAA-sponsored athletic teams and making sure that scheduling is done, referees are booked and paid for, that events are staffed by himself as well as his assistant. And I have a director of exceptional services, which for lack of a better term is special education. That individual coordinates and oversees all of our special education clientele. Who am I missing? My director of curriculum, who literally is my right hand in the main office, oversees all of our student information system, our schedule building, our grade dissemination and reporting. We have a tremendous amount of responsibility at the administrative level. My job description really boils down to day-to-day operations of this institution and other duties assigned by the superintendent. And on any given day, that scope and sequence may change dramatically. One thing I think we haven't mentioned yet is the level of which we are called outside of the building for one reason or another, whether it's to meet as a leadership team to cultivate our budget, which over the years we've invested a great deal of hours in doing so. That takes us away from our primary function. And when that happens, we rely on those who assist us to run this building and do so effectively. So there's a great deal of trust that goes into that, and we want to make sure that we're staffing those positions with the appropriate people who are competent and qualified and successful in assisting us in maintaining our operations. And you ask any principal in the state, whether it's K-4 or 9-12 and everything in between, there's a great deal that goes into our jobs on a daily basis, and you can't really put one tag on what we do on a day-to-day basis.
I just have one question. The two teachers that are reduction, where are they from?
Middle school.
Middle school.
We've been cutting one, you may remember, we had 5 teachers at a grade level, and as our enrollment has reduced, we've gone down to 4 teachers per grade level consistently over the past several years, and we have a low enrollment in our 4th grade going up.
Thank you. I have another question for the principal. Each school have a guidance counselor. Well, it sounds like a lot of the assistants are taking on the guidance counselor's job. What do they do?
I'm sorry, I didn't. Oh, the guidance counselor?
Yeah.
Guidance counselors, deal with, students, adjustments to school and issues in school. They are probably the busiest people in the building. I have one, 350 students and 60 staff members. And it's really hard without giving, certain things, that are not appropriate in public session, to be honest with you, but, there are things that they deal with homeless, to, student self-injury, to, safety things, to, anger issues, to anxiety issues, to, issues that they bring out of school into the school. And so, everybody works in harmony, because there's sometimes that one turns into the other. For instance, if there's a discipline behavior issue going on, there's probably a reason for that. And so, they're dealing with the discipline issue, and then there's a referral to the counselor. The opposite is true. There may be something that's happening that the counselor finds out, and there's a referral to the assistant principal. This is multiple, on a regular basis. It is, daily. We deal with those types of issues. So there's a very distinct difference between a behavior, and, a situation where a counselor may need to deal with them, but sometimes they do intersect. Does that make sense?
And I would add, when all that's said and done, the core of their job responsibility is to guide students along their academic pathway. So whether it's promotion to the high school, or ultimately receiving their diploma and moving on to post-secondary education, the core of a guidance counselor or school counselor's role is to support and help programmatically get a student along their pathway towards success. And I think a lot of this stuff also interferes with that, and they have to triage and handle each student accordingly.
I guess the reason for my question is, as you described what the assistant principal did, it sounded just like a guidance counselor. And if the assistant does all that work, that was my question, what does the guidance counselor do?
I would say more often than not, they're working in tandem. So at Pembroke Academy, every guidance counselor is tethered to a dean of students. So there's a dean of students and 2 guidance counselors in each house. And if a student is in crisis, for example, they're going to deal with the dean of students first to make sure that they're safe and supported and accounted for. But there may be some secondary level of support necessary for that student, and that's when they go across the hall and they meet with their school counselor to see what is going on outside of these walls that contributes to their crisis. So it really is a tandem approach. It's very rare that we don't see a student who's in crisis that's working with both their counselor and their dean of students.
We also do a lot of, group, work with students, social setting groups. You might hear a kid say, I had a lunch bunch today. In our building, that means it's all with the counselor, with a small group to work on socially, responsible, things to do. They also go into the classroom and do, social emotional work, working with kids on how to regulate and how to, act appropriately in our setting. They also are the link to the community, so there's a lot of referrals to mental health centers. There's also a lot of work with parents that come in and supporting them on how to deal with certain situations that are in the child. Counseling sessions to, where the assistant principal is, student management is part of it, and a lot of what they do is usually, after the fact, and there's been some kind of reaction that a student has done in the building that requires, the policy to make sure they're safe and that they're not harming others, themselves or others, and then there's typically a referral to the counselor.
Can I just add a big missing piece that you were describing is the special education 201 plan and 504 plan. So that's just, I know, a tremendous amount added to, in addition.
Thank you, yeah, that's correct. Our counselor is also in charge of all the 504 plans in the building, and our building has approximately 50 of them. So they become the supervisors for all those modifications that happen for those 50 students in the classrooms throughout the building.
I just had, one question. When you had the total of students, how many does the Hill School look for population now that we're gonna merge?
We're gonna.
Oh,
If I can, I think it's important for everyone to understand, the level of work and the amount of work that we need these folks to do relative to social, emotional issues is just increasing every year. At the high school level, what's the frequency of the youth risk behavior survey? What's the frequency of it?
Every other year?
Every other year.
Yeah.
So every other year, our students are asked to voluntarily take part in the youth risk behavior survey. This survey is a tool that asks them their attitudes and opinions about drug use, about alcohol use, about anxiety and depression, about sexual behaviors that they participate in. Frankly, it gets down to, suicidal ideation. And I'm trying to think of other examples, but I think I got I think I hit some areas. Sorry?
Vaping is a really big issue.
Again, not just, drugs, et cetera. The results of that youth risk behavior survey at the statewide level, which we fairly mimic, and the district level, is alarming. It is absolutely alarming. The amount of issues that our kids are dealing with and what they're thinking about and decisions they're making relative to their everyday health is frightening. Along those lines, and certainly a major focus of the board as well as administration and frankly everyone in the building every day. Along those lines, what was asked for by these folks in this budget is frankly to add a couple of full-time social workers, just because the level of those issues and how we're trying to deal with it. Frankly, the pitch was made, the impassioned, emotional pitch was made, we're sort of getting to the point where we need to do more than we can, and we need these resources. Sorry, Tina, I don't mean to. We need these resources. We had a very impassioned discussion at the board level about adding that to the budget, and those positions are not in the budget this year. And quite frankly, we looked at the role of the assistant principal and what that role can do in terms of assisting with those issues. So I guess what I'm hoping to come away with is we had a bunch of great kids. A lot of them are really struggling with some kind of poor decisions that are affecting their health and their future on a daily basis. We're providing what level of support we can. Our administrators are asking to step that up a notch. But we need to balance that with, frankly, the bottom line. If money wasn't an option, if we're, with those positions being in the budget, we'd probably be asking for them and then some in order to address this. And again, it's not a Pembroke issue, it's a state issue, and you can ask them to what degree it's beyond the state. It is absolutely a state issue. There's nothing unique or different about Pembroke when you compare it to state averages in terms of the results of the survey. But it's what we're dealing with. It's what we're trying to provide some support. We're not looking to add resources at this point in time, but we're absolutely looking to maintain what resources we have in order to provide as much support as we can and keep these kids supported and healthy and making good decisions and being successful in their academic endeavors.
Yeah, I have a question. We brought up drug use and stuff like that. Is the Carter schools involved in drug rehabilitation? What are the obligations of the school to be involved in that?
I'm sorry?
Drug rehab.
Yeah, what, yeah?
And what are the obligations of the school as far as helping out in the rehab of the children and, the aspect of the...
Well, certainly in middle school, we don't rehab students. We don't qualify to do that, but we are an agency that will support families to to get that support and need that they have. So we have contacts all over the area, so we're able to refer them. We would not start doing any of that type of, thing at the building level. You know, I think that would be, that's another whole discussion.
Right.
That's a whole thing. What we see a lot in our school, quite honestly, is not student addiction. There's addiction and it's typically to adults.
Right.
Yeah. So that's part of what we have to manage, and those people, including myself, we have to manage some of those things. And that is, like I said, I don't want to paint this picture that I feel like I'm painting here, but we have folks that are in real trouble. And it doesn't happen one at a time. You know, I don't sound like that, but it comes at you pretty hard and pretty steady on a regular basis, with multiple things going on daily on a regular basis. So we wouldn't do that in that drug rehab in our building, but we do, reference and show folks where they can get that support, and we walk them through that process.
At the high school, we could take it one step further. We wouldn't necessarily conduct rehab, but we do have an intervention and prevention counselor full-time on staff who is located in one of our houses here. He does service the entire caseload of students in the building. He doesn't necessarily have his own caseload, but students are referred to him from time to time from guidance counselors or deans of students. If a student has been suspended or facing disciplinary issues for substance abuse or use on campus, they would certainly be referred to the intervention and prevention counselor prior to re-entry from their suspension.
Okay, I have one question. Are you replacing the paraprofessionals at TRS that you didn't fill last year? In this budget?
Did you add any of those?
We did this year, move-in, for students that move in. But other than that, there's nothing.
We didn't fill, the classroom 8, we have 4 classroom paraprofessionals, 5. We didn't fill those, we did not have those back.
Thanks.
I have kind of a generic question about, immediate future. I would infer from everything I hear that the village school will not be in operation next September, and that's kind of an irrevocable decision. You are consolidating at the Hill, during the summer months, and that's happening.
We got some slides.
Okay, thank you.
Paid attention, listened to the question, and made sure there were some slides. Can I move on? All right, student enrollment. So, Patty, you want to?
Sure, it's up and down constantly, it varies from school to school, so we've just chosen to take the October 1st count, that's called our beginning of year report, that, the state sets the student enrollment on that date, so that's the date we've chosen to use, on any given day, and the number will change. But you can see, we included the last 5 years of enrollment, 2014-15, we were at almost 1,600, same as following year, right now we're looking at 1,430. As of our October 1st.
That number includes all students? What's the breakdown?
Maybe Amber pulled your sheet, because we didn't have it on here, you have it by, you mean by like?
By school.
Elements by school. That's a total enrollment by school.
No,
It's in our binders, let me put my hands on it and mark it for you for later. I know the student enrollment is broken down. We can come back to that, and give me a minute.
Thank you. I know you're looking a lot more closely at what's driving these numbers this year. And this is kind of even historically speaking, kind of a big jump does this look to you like an anomaly? Does it look like it's gonna be a continuing trend? You know, since we are looking at the 1920 budget, what do you think this big drop in the current year says about what's gonna happen next?
I'm looking, yeah, we're projecting, 1454 for next year. So really, all we can do is like carry our classes forward, eliminate the seniors, and try to predict what we're gonna have for kindergarten, and that's always a variable. We just don't know, so we estimated, I think, we had 71 kindergartners in 17-18. This year we had 59, so we projected 65. You know, that's the best we can do.
Ryan, further to your question, I can tell you that births in the area are down, based on where I work from today. I am personally doing my best, but the rest of you haven't stepped up near as much as you could have. So the other number, and I'm not sure what the number is today. Historically, the number was, and Jerry, I bet you remember, I think it was like 1.7. So Jerry can tell me, he knows exactly where I'm going.
The numbers on live birth have been traditionally rather unreliable and not very predictive of what happens.
No, because
what the other factor that I'm not aware there's any mechanism to really track this is that Pembroke will attract people of a certain age with a certain number of kids, and they reside in Pembroke for a certain number of years, and then they leave the community, and they're replaced with like kind. So you've got this preponderance of kids of a certain age group that never seem to migrate out of it, and it makes it very difficult, predicated on live births for an area, to determine what are you gonna have 2 or 3 years out.
Okay, so that's not where I was going to go.
All right.
Where I was going, the number, I believe it was 1.7, it was right around 1.7. It was a fraction of a child, the average kids per house in Pembroke. So when you look, it was something like that. So there is somewhat nodding. So we're looking at the potential development. You know, we just heard from Seward that they're able to negotiate the increased capacity. We have, Ian can tell how many houses are already, or not just houses, but how many residences are on the books right now, and it's well over 100, correct?
Oh, yeah.
So well over 100. So if that 1.7 number is anywhere close to still being accurate, you know, just residential growth in Pembroke could absolutely drive that number up. Again, it's tough because people just aren't having children the way they used to. Frankly, a family of 3 these days is a big family. You know, a family of 3 50 years ago was not even trying, right? So, you know, we're looking at that, but it's tough, and, you know, it was, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, Pembroke Academy topped out at 1,153 students. And because we're over 1,150 students, the NHIAA forced us into Class L. We were only over that number for literally 1 day, and now we're less than 800 students. We were talking that many years ago about this district needing a second high school. Are those days going to come back? Who knows? I mean, it's gone up huge, not just from Pembroke, but outside us in Chichester, and it's come down. Who's to say what the future is going to hold? We're doing our best, and we're trying not to overly predict, just really look at numbers we know ours.
How does student enrollment track with town and area school population? Is there a correlation?
Like a ratio?
Is there a correlation?
You know, that's a great question, and maybe we can do a little work on that and bring that next meeting.
Because if it's not tracking, then maybe there's a reason that ought to be looked at as to.
We have the numbers, so we can, we not tonight, but we can definitely look at that.
I have the enrollment numbers, is that okay? Found the sheet. So for the K-4 level, it's 313 students. For Three Rivers, it's 357. And for PA, it's 760. And again, that was as of October 1st.
So that's 7,613, just Pembroke residents.
No, that's all kids.
That's all surrounding.
Okay, any more questions for enrollment? Yep.
I remember one of the problems we had, brought up last time is that outlying towns like Allentown, Dutchville, all that stuff, would claim that they're gonna send 10 students to site, and all of a sudden showed up, yet we planned for 10. And we land up eating any cost that's involved in there. That's still a problem, or is that, if they say they're gonna send a number, but then they, either send that number or we pay for it?
That's something that Amber will review with you. I don't mean to keep putting things off, but she has a pretty complex sheet that she's developed, for that reason, so that we started taking a longitudinal look at, okay, for the past 3 years, those beginning numbers for Allenstown, if 8 moves this year, 9 moves next year, then I guess we know where we're gonna project for the following year. So we've tried to take a longer look because of the declining enrollment and see if we can develop some trends, so that we project it accurately.
And one of the issues that I found from looking at the enrollment, they would say, well, how are we losing 14 students from the time you project to the time they walk through the door? Well, you gotta remember that by the time it's 14, 15 months. So not only is it that summer, but it's any change that has occurred over that entire previous year. And then whatever over the summer, or whether they choose to go to another high school or whatever may be, there's a variety of factors that come into play in a great deal of length of time as well. And I have developed a method of tracking monthly and looking to see, okay, what are the changes from month to month, and where are these students going? And the biggest changes are either they're moving from one of our area districts to the other, or one of our area schools is moving to Pembroke, which obviously plays a different role when it comes to revenue, or they're moving across, around the state or out of state. So there's a bunch of different factors that come into play in regards to that, but that is one of the things that we are tracking, we are looking at, so that when we see a drop, it's justifiable. And I think before, prior to last year, there wasn't a lot of analytical data. So last year I collected 5-6 years worth of data that I was able to take a look at, analyze, and come up with a different method moving forward. And I've continued with that method this year and next year.
I can tell you to Dan's question about ratio, Dan, one of the numbers that frankly we haven't talked about much at board level recently, but there is a transient ratio that we looked at years ago. And what that measured was what percentage of students who start out in your district are staying in your district. And I can tell you, in Allenstown, which is a major sending town to Pembroke Academy, the transient factor was, please don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was well over 80%. Meaning over 80% of the students who start in Allenstown do not end up finishing their education in Allenstown. So it makes it, really difficult. The other thing that, we're dealing with as a town in terms of this is we have a really hot real estate market. The neighborhood Ann and I live in, I had a neighbor who a couple of years ago had their house on the market for a year without a single showing. Put it on the market, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, sold it the same day. Guy down the street, we had a house in Donna Drive that sold for just under $300,000. So when you look at, why are people doing what they're doing? If you were original to Donna Drive and spent $60,000 on that house, and you could sell it for $300,000, there's a few people taking advantage of that and doing what they're doing. So just to make the money, I guess. Transient is something that we have looked at in the past. It is an issue, and I did want to mention the real estate market is also affecting this as well.
I think along with your question, what residents want to find out is, are we getting reimbursed somehow? Allentown said they're sending 10 and we only have the 2 students. We're still supplying the school for PA for all those 10 students. That's what the question is.
We receive revenue for the daily attendance that those students have attended the school. So if they attend 60 days, they're sending 60 days of revenue for that student. The remainder of the year is nothing.
But we're still staffing for 10 students and only 2 come for the whole entire year. Allentown's not reimbursing for students. They said they would send $10.
But they are for like.
They are for what?
For these
per student.
Capital fee per student, correct.
So by and large, the way it works is take the Pembroke Academy's budget, divide it by the number of students, and if you're Epsom and sending 9 amount of students, that's the number you pay. But there is the one place where we did build in some protection is for bond expenditures. You know, we're improving. You know, Allentown, Epsom, and Chichester are contractually obligated to. There is a payment relative to that specific.
I had asked several years ago if the area agreement had a provision whereby if some sending district underestimated overestimated the enrollment, that was the basis on which the budget was projected, whether there was a way to recoup that in the area agreement. And that's been let's amend it. Let's do something about it, rather than accept it.
I think we're getting out of purview of the budget committee, and quite frankly, I'm a little alarmed because I wouldn't want to tell somebody, well, I'm moving out of town and pulling my kids out and have them say, you're not going anywhere. We got a commitment to send this kid to Pembroke Academy, and that's where they're going to go because we're having to pay for it. I mean, there has to be value for the compensation received, and if you're not sending the student and you're being told to pay for it, I'm going to tell you, when you open that area agreement, I'll negotiate on the top part of the sending towns. Pembroke won't come out of that looking too well. I think when you're being reimbursed the actual cost and part of the risk of doing business and being in the school business is that you pick that up. That decision was made decades ago when nobody wanted to form an AREA and Pembroke became a town. Pembroke Academy became a town's school. There's no changing that unless we wanted to open it up and say, we're going to get an AREA agreement. We're going to virtually marry these communities. I don't think that's a discussion we want to have. It certainly isn't anything that we can look at in the short term.
I can tell you, one thing we've absolutely done at the board level is we have had students, I'll give Epsom a great example. There are students who live in Epsom that could probably, if they had a good enough arm, throw a stone and hit full ground. So they've come to the board and said, look, we understand we're contractually obligated to attend Pembroke Academy. We're asking, and the way it works is, you need to, that Epsom student needs to go to the Epsom board, ask the Epsom board if they can attend Co-Brown. Then they need to come to the Pembroke board and ask the Pembroke board if they can attend Co-Brown. I can tell you the last several years, there better be a reason that fits very specific criteria, and criteria and beyond, I happen to live closer to this other school. So while I absolutely agree with Jerry, you know, could we open up the area? Sure, if everyone voted to. Would we end up with a better agreement? Maybe not. There's a reason no one wants to open it up. You know, if we ever lost Epsom and Chichester and they said they're going to start sending their kids to another town too, we're in a whole different situation. So it does have some commitment going forward. But we are sensitive about working with the other school boards and ensuring that, you know, their kids are coming here when we're able to provide the services that they require. And when you go back to, you know, frankly, the first slide after the agenda, your review, ensure Pembroke Academy remains a school of choice. That is a really important focus that we put into this budget. You know, we don't want to force people to come here. We want to provide an educational opportunity where people want to come here. And, you know, Amber will get into, you know, the number of students from Hooksett who choose to come here. They could go to, Lowell, or they could go to Pinkerton. If you've never been to Pinkerton, that's like a high-end college campus, and yet they're still choosing to come here. So that was certainly a focus of the budget. Moving on. Cost per pupil. So I did want to give the budget committee sort of sense, where does Pembroke sort of play out relative to what we're spending per pupil, especially compared to the rest of the state over the last several years. So,
Yep, numbers, they're for you, we won't bother reading them. If you have any questions, we took them straight from the state report, and we did just this week get the 17-18 figures from the state, so those are up to date.
So I think it's important to highlight the fact that we have been under state average, at least going back to 13-14. And under various amounts over that period of time. Any questions? All right, revenue. I'm going to turn this one over to Amber, and she's already referenced some of this, but she's going to walk us through our approach to revenue and how that works.
So first, as usual, you will see the estimated revenue sheet when you get your binders. It's broken out the same fashion as you've seen prior. Some of the key items before I get into the approach is, so the difference between the tax rate setting revenues that we have for this year and the estimated revenues for next year, there is $146,640 reduction. That reduction, the majority of that occurs in adequacy aid. We have $133,000 worth of less adequacy aid that we're anticipating for next year. That's the biggest change that occurred. We also, the other thing we have to take into consideration is the infrastructure grant that we have this current year. Those dollars, those grant dollars wouldn't be estimated for next year, and those are a little bit more than $117,000. So that comes into play as well. We do have a couple areas of increase. One of them is actually the kindergarten aid. That's fairly new, as we talked about last year. And so we will be getting additional dollars next year, we are anticipating. That's a $65,000 increase now, so that's actually rather large. As well as some tuition dollars as well have increased comparative to what this year is, and a lot of that is due to enrollment for next year is higher than what we currently have in this fiscal year. So that's basically the breakdown. You'll again see this in your packet, so you can take a look at it while it's in front of you. You may have more additional questions once you have the actual information in front of you, but I just wanted to point out some key factors up front so that when you see it, you understand why. The approach, I took the same approach as I took last year. The benefit I had is I had a full year additional information, not only from what I gathered from the last 5 years, but looking at live data month to month, which I didn't have previous. I'm building that up so that as the time goes on, when we go through budget session, I can start looking at these charts and say, okay, I'm really seeing a decline in enrollment in the month of December. So if I'm seeing from December to January or March, 6, 7 students leaving, I can start to create more of a trend basis. Before I didn't have a month-to-month, so I can't look at trend in a year time span of what's happening. I can only look at the beginning and ending. So I'm hoping to utilize that information to help in the future. But it did help give a basis. So I used the same format as last year. We looked at what the current enrollment is. We subtracted out the the 12th graders and added in the 8th graders. I used the proposed Pembroke Academy expenses for their operating budget to come up with a net cost per student. And then what I did from there is I took a 90% estimated enrollment, and so if they had, let's just say, the area students had 444 students anticipated to walk through the doors in the fall, we took 90% of that figure, so we're estimating only 400 of those students. So that's our safeguard that we put in place, that we underestimated how many students would walk through the doors. And a big reason is kind of what I mentioned earlier, is that the time span between when we budget and when they actually walk through the doors at Pembroke Academy, there's a lot that can happen in that time frame. So we wanted to make sure that we took the measure to cover anything that could occur the rest of this year, as well as over the summer, as well as whatever happens within the next budget cycle. Because really, we're looking at changes of almost a year and a half of school, right? So you're taking a whole year next year plus half of this year. So those changes that occur could potentially be drastic. So when I looked at, and I know last year a lot of people were concerned about 90% and why aren't we using 80 or 85%, I really don't think we can look at it as necessarily the 80 or 95%, but more as how many students does that represent? So when you look at like a 90% drop, we'll look at, actually it is 44 students, so that's probably why it's fresh in my head. 444 students we're looking at on an actual roster for just area students, not including non-area, just area. So we're estimating 400 students. That's 44 students we're saying aren't going to walk through the doors. Is that going to happen? Probably not, right? We used the same method last year, and we were up 26 students, which is one of the reasons why we saw in the beginning of this presentation that we had a decent surplus in that tuition revenue. But again, it does at least safeguard us from not only students not walking through the door, but any other potential revenue shortfalls that might fall in some of the other areas. We don't get to anticipate it from Medicaid or the state or whatever it may be. That's basically, you'll see in your packet, you'll have the same sheet as I had last year, where it breaks down where those numbers came from, as well as the high school rate. The one difference that I did on this tuition sheet is I put blocks around, and they're like dotted. When you look at this tuition sheet, you'll be able to mirror this right to your estimated revenue sheet, so you can see where it relates. I thought that might be helpful for you.
Just a quick snapshot then. A concern of the budget committee is what's going to happen to the tax rate. And you told us that, on the expenditure side, there'll be $286,547 more in a Fund 1 budget. Can you give us the equivalent snapshot to the total revenue? How is total revenue going to change? Will it go up or down, and by how much? Because what I would like to be able to do is net the revenue change and the expenditure change together, so that I can get a pretty good idea of what it's going to do to the tax rate.
That's in the packet.
Yeah, I have the tax rate in the packet as well, that breakdown. It looks different than Martha pages, but I do have that in here, that breakdown as well.
All right, then help me to properly frame my approach to this as I work on it throughout the holidays. How easy will it be for me to match the revenue numbers to the Fund 1 numbers? Because your Fund 4 there are other sources of revenue like lunch money and things like that that have nothing to do with the tax rate. Or capital reserve funds going back and forth, have nothing to do with the tax rate per se. So, should I be able to readily find the revenue number that I can match with the expenditure number? You get a snapshot of what's gonna happen to the tax rate?
You should, yeah, yes, you can. It does, the revenue does play a toll in the same way for food service and the grant. The difference is you're gonna have your Fund 1 total, and then underneath you have your food service and grant. Those are broken out. So those amounts are also in your revenue sheet. So, yes, it still ties out. And the answer to your question earlier is what's the difference? So the total district appropriation, not just Fund 1, the difference is $398,000 and change. The difference in revenue is $1.5 million and change. And that's because of the $1.3 million that we returned this current year.
So when you subtract that, the actual, if you took out the large amount that we returned, it's, $146,640.
So that's the difference that I spoke about when I first started talking about the revenue breakdown. That the actual difference from what we're currently in this fiscal year is $146,000.
Okay, thank you.
And again, that's broken out, and I did put a note at the bottom of the, estimated revenue sheet that explains that.
All right, thank you.
My question is that you're calculating the 90%, for the 18-19, year, do we come close to 90% of the students we're estimating to come?
For this current fiscal year that we're in right now?
Right. Because I know if we use
we still have several. I didn't bring the current one that we're in right now, but we have, I want to say, like 40-something or more students that we still could lose, and we would still be okay.
Right.
Yes.
So do you know the percentage used for 17-18 budget?
17-18, I think I used 92. I think it was 92, 93, I think I used.
We can confirm that.
But we had some substantial enrollment changes during that period of time. We had large populations going to charter school. We had large populations moving around the state, inter-district. For obvious reasons, I took a great deal of time to look into why that occurred. And that particular year, there were just a lot of changes that occurred.
We have a couple new charters just opened this year too.
So, when I take a 8:33, would you like us, my sense is what we have to continue to talk about in this presentation is far beyond what we want to say tonight, because we're looking at, grants, health insurance, village school, and our CIP. But Karen, pleasure to share.
I'd like to take the pleasure of the board, what,
I'd like to join tonight.
okay, others? Any questions for adjourning tonight, or I'm reading as well?
I have no objection to adjourning. I would like to have, just one final question. Has the board decided what it wants to do with capital reserve balances as part of the upcoming budget?
There's a slide for that.
I mean,
We have a slide for that.
We're on the way till we get to that slide.
You know how much that pleases me, to be able to say we have a slide for that?
I'll spend the next couple of weeks thinking up a question and you don't have a slide for it.
Game on. I reserve the right to add slides though, if that's gonna be the game.
So the plan will be to, adjourn the discussion on the presentation and reconvene on the discussion on the January 3rd meeting. Okay with everyone? In preparation for that, so last year we had the spreadsheets that we were able to peruse through, during our break time. I personally found that very helpful. to have that, the
The budget
spreadsheets
spreadsheet?
in hand. Yeah, so if we could have those, in preparation.
Do you mean your handout, or do you mean the
No, the
spreadsheet
actual
sent to you?
spreadsheet.
Of,
Yeah,
of
the
the
actual-
budget,
The actual Excel files.
of the operating budget?
Yeah, and there was also the revenue Excel, file that you had last year that was really helpful too.
Okay.
So, when can we have those?
I had the budget prepared to send out immediately, estimated, when I go home, I can send it.
Okay, sometime maybe it's in the next week or so?
I will send it when I get home.
Oh,
So you don't have,
okay.
She said tonight.
Oh, okay. Okay,
She's
that's
going
all
home before next week.
I hope you go home
Tomorrow
next
would be
week.
fine. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And could we hand out your binders before you go?
Yeah,
Please do.
I'd like to be showing what
no, we will not, that's a good question. So as we were planning on meeting back at the town hall, before we meet with the team, we should probably meet here again.
Location is really,
Thank you. Can we just work up the hard copy? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
so Karen, if I can just ask real quick,
Yeah.
can I get some quick feedback relative to what we present so far, how is it? And would you like us to, I mean, this is how we're gonna continue to proceed, so, and if not tonight, an email or whatever, because, we're answering questions great. Frankly, I felt like we got some good questions and there was some nice dialogue. But if there's any sort of T's we're not crossing or I's we're not dotting, you know, please let Patty know and we'll make sure to address that next time.
So the process that we've been using so far, which I think is working pretty well, is any questions, like we did have a couple that came up for water sewer and some town, filtering those through the chair, and then, for instance, I was sending those to David, and then he would send it out to whoever needs to answer the question, and once he got it back, he would send it to me, and then I can disseminate it to the rest of the board. So I think that works pretty well, so you're not getting your inbox and getting flooded with questions and perhaps multiple instances of the same question, right? It's a little bit more concerning. So if that's okay with you, we can proceed with that. Any other comments or feedback from the presentation so far? Anything, not getting, general comments?
I'm just devastated that we meet the week between Christmas and New Year's,
Yeah.
because I love coming to these
Yeah.
meetings.
Okay.
Did we say town hall next time?
Yeah.
Did I miss that?
Yeah, so we will plan on reconvening on this discussion on January 3rd, Thursday, January 3rd, which is our next scheduled budget committee meeting at the town hall at 6:30. So regular meeting. Is that okay? All right. That's, I had some other business that can wait until, January 3rd, just some, updates on some questions that we got, but I'll put that on the agenda for January 3rd. Other than that, we just have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?